The gravel crunched under the tires of the old pickup truck as it rolled to a stop outside Willow Creek Nursing Home, a squat, faded building nestled in the rolling hills of rural Tennessee. Margaret Hale, 68, sat in the passenger seat, her gnarled hands clutching a worn leather satchel. Her son, Tom, stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, while her daughter, Lisa, fidgeted with her phone in the back. The air was thick with unspoken words, the kind that fester when love curdles into obligation. Margaret's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a rage she hadn't felt in decades. They were leaving her here, her own flesh and blood, discarding her like a broken tool. She stepped out, the summer heat wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. The nursing home sign, chipped and peeling, loomed above the entrance. Tom muttered something about doing what's best, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. Lisa, barely looking up from her screen, said, "It's nice here, Mom. You'll be taken care of." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Taken care of? She'd raised them single-handedly after their father walked out, worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and this was her reward. A sterile room in a place that smelled of antiseptic and regret. Inside, the lobby was a blur of beige walls and flickering fluorescence. A nurse with a forced smile handed her a clipboard of forms. Margaret's hands trembled as she signed, not because she was frail, but because she was fighting the urge to scream. Her children stood by the door, already edging toward the exit. "We'll visit soon," Tom said, his voice hollow. Lisa gave a quick hug, her perfume sharp and fleeting. Then they were gone, the glass doors swinging shut behind them. Margaret stood alone, the satchel heavy in her arms, her life reduced to a single bag. But something shifted in her that moment, a spark, a defiance. She wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The nursing home was a prison only if she let it be. As she was led to her room, her mind churned. She'd built a life from nothing once before. She could do it again. The other residents shuffled through the halls, some with vacant stares, others whispering complaints about cold food and locked doors. Margaret listened, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The overworked staff, the outdated equipment, the air of resignation that clung to the place like dust. She overheard a nurse muttering about the home's owner, a distant corporate type who hadn't set foot here in years. The place was bleeding money, barely staying afloat. An idea began to take root, wild and improbable, but Margaret had never shied away from the impossible. That night, in her narrow bed, she opened her satchel and pulled out a small notebook. It held the details of her life savings, tucked away in a modest account she'd guarded fiercely. Her children didn't know about it. $400,000, scraped together from years of frugality and side hustles. She'd meant it for their future, but they'd made their choice. Now, it was hers to wield. The next morning, she requested a meeting with the home's administrator, a harried woman named Clara who looked like she hadn't slept in a decade. "I want to know about the ownership," Margaret said, her voice steady. Clara blinked, surprised by the new resident's intensity. "It's a private company, ma'am. They're not very hands-on." Margaret leaned forward. "Are they selling?" Clara hesitated, then admitted the home was on the market. Cheap, too, because no one wanted a failing facility in the middle of nowhere. Margaret's heart raced. She could buy it. She could take control. But what would that mean? Could she turn this place around? And what about her kids? How would they react when they learned their discarded mother wasn't just surviving, but thriving? She smiled, a glint of steel in her eyes. Let them find out the hard way. Margaret spent the next week learning the nursing home's pulse. She wandered the halls, striking up conversations with residents and staff, her notebook filling with observations. The food was bland, the activities non-existent, and the staff, though kind, were stretched thin. Yet, the residents weren't just bodies in beds. They were farmers, teachers, mechanics, people with stories etched into their wrinkles. Margaret saw potential where others saw decay. She contacted a lawyer, a local named Ed Grayson, who'd handled her late brother's estate. Over coffee at a diner in town, she laid out her plan. "I want to buy Willow Creek," she said, her voice low but fierce. Ed raised an eyebrow, his fork pausing mid-bite. "Maggie, That place is a money pit. You sure about this? She nodded. I'm not just buying a building. I'm buying my life back. Ed dug into the details. The owner, a faceless corporation called Horizon Care, was desperate to sell. The price was $350,000, steep, but within Margaret's reach. She'd have to liquidate her savings, take a small loan, and bet everything on her ability to turn the place around. Ed warned her about the risks, the home's debts, the repairs needed, the staff turnover. But Margaret wasn't listening to doubts. She'd faced worse odds raising 2 kids alone in a trailer park. By the end of the month, the deal was done. Margaret Hale, the woman her children had written off, was the new owner of Willow Creek Nursing Home. She moved out of her residence room and into a small office, where she pored over budgets and schedules. The staff were skeptical at first, an old lady running the show, but Margaret's no-nonsense attitude won them over. She raised wages, hired a new cook, and started a garden out back where residents could grow vegetables. The home began to hum with life. Word spread through town. Neighbors who'd known Margaret for decades stopped by, some to gawk, others to help. A local carpenter fixed the sagging porch for free. A retired teacher offered to lead book clubs. Margaret's vision was simple: make Willow Creek a home, not a warehouse. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every resident who'd been forgotten. But her children hadn't visited. Not once. Margaret had expected as much, but the silence stung. She heard through the grapevine that Tom was busy with his auto shop and Lisa was planning her wedding. They'd moved on, assuming she was fading away. The thought fueled her. She met with Ed again, this time about a bolder move. I want to bar them from visiting, she said, her voice cold. Ed leaned back, stunned. Legally? That's harsh, Maggie. She didn't flinch. They left me here to rot. They don't get to waltz back in when it suits them. Ed drafted the paperwork, citing her authority as the owner. For 6 months, Tom and Lisa would be barred from the premises. Margaret didn't want revenge. She wanted them to feel the weight of their choice. But as she signed the order, a question gnawed at her. Was she punishing them, or herself? Could she ever rebuild what they'd broken? The answers weren't clear, but she pushed forward, her resolve like iron. The nursing home's transformation gained momentum. Residents smiled more, staff stayed longer, and the garden bloomed with tomatoes and zucchini. Margaret felt alive, but the ache of her children's betrayal lingered. What would it take for them to see her, really see her, not as a burden, but as the woman who'd given them everything? The first sign of trouble came in late August, when a sleek sedan pulled into the nursing home's lot. Margaret was in the garden, dirt under her nails, when Clara rushed out, her face pale. Your kids are here, she whispered. Margaret straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. Her heart thudded, but she kept her face calm. Let them try to come in, she said. Tom and Lisa stood in the lobby, their faces a mix of confusion and indignation. A new security guard, hired on Margaret's dime, blocked their path. You're not on the approved list, he said, holding up a clipboard. Tom's voice rose. She's our mother. You can't keep us out. Lisa, clutching her purse, snapped. This is ridiculous. Where is she? Margaret stepped into the doorway, her presence silencing them. You left me here, she said, her voice low and steady. You don't get to decide when you're family again. Tom's face reddened, his fists clenching. We were doing what was best for you, he shouted. Lisa chimed in. You're acting like we're the bad guys. Margaret didn't waver. You made your choice. Now live with it. The guard escorted them out, their protests echoing through the lot. The confrontation shook Margaret more than she let on. That night, she sat in her office, staring at an old photo of Tom and Lisa as kids, their gap-toothed smiles beaming. Had she gone too far? Was barring them cruel? But then she remembered the coldness in their eyes as they'd left her here. No, she thought. They needed to learn. The town buzzed with gossip. Some called Margaret a hero, others a tyrant. A local reporter, sensing a story, interviewed her. Why bar your own kids? He asked. Margaret looked him square in the eye. Because family isn't just blood. It's who shows up. The article spread, painting her as both victim and victor. It reached Tom and Lisa, who were humiliated. They called, left voicemails, sent letters, all unanswered. Margaret wasn't ready to hear their excuses. Meanwhile, Willow Creek thrived. The garden became a community hub, with kids from the local school volunteering to plant flowers. A music therapist started weekly sing-alongs, and the residents' stories filled the air with laughter and tears. Margaret felt a purpose she hadn't known since her kids were young. But the victory was bittersweet. Every smile from a resident reminded her of the ones missing from her children. One evening, a resident named Ruth, a former librarian with sharp eyes, pulled Margaret aside. "You're doing good here," Ruth said. "But don't let anger eat you up. Kids make mistakes. Doesn't mean they're lost forever." Margaret nodded, but the words stung. Was she holding onto her pain too tightly? Could she forgive without forgetting? The 6-month ban was nearing its halfway mark. Margaret wondered what would happen when it ended. Would her kids fight to reconnect, or had they already written her off for good? The question hung heavy, but she pushed it aside. There was work to do, residents to care for, a home to rebuild. Yet, deep down, she knew the real battle was still ahead. Fall swept into Tennessee, painting the hills in reds and golds. Willow Creek was unrecognizable, fresh paint on the walls, new furniture in the common room, and a calendar packed with activities. Margaret had hired a physical therapist and a chef who specialized in comfort food. The residents, once listless, now played cards, painted, and shared stories under the oak trees. The nursing home wasn't just surviving, it was alive. But the confrontation with her kids had left a mark. Margaret threw herself into work, avoiding the ache in her chest. She was winning the war for Willow Creek, but the cost was a growing distance between her and the family she'd once lived for. Letters from Tom and Lisa piled up, unopened, on her desk. She wasn't ready to face their words, or her own guilt. Then came the lawsuit. Tom and Lisa, furious at being barred, hired a lawyer to challenge Margaret's ownership. They claimed she was mentally unfit, that her purchase of the home was a reckless act of spite. The news hit like a punch. Margaret sat in her office, the legal papers trembling in her hands. They weren't just rejecting her. They were trying to take everything she'd built. Ed, her lawyer, was blunt. "They've got no case, Maggie. You're sharp as a tack, and the sale was legit. But this'll get ugly." Margaret nodded, her jaw tight. "Let it. I'm not backing down." The town rallied behind her. Residents wrote letters to the local paper, praising her changes. Staff offered to testify. Even the mayor, a gruff man who rarely left his farm, stopped by to say, "You're one of us, Margaret. We've got your back." The court date was set for early December. Margaret prepared like a general, gathering financial records, staff testimonies, and photos of the home's transformation. She walked the halls at night, talking to residents like Ruth, who reminded her, "You're not just fighting for you. You're fighting for all of us." The words gave her strength, but the fear lingered. What if she lost? What if her kids won, stripping her of her purpose? As the hearing approached, Margaret noticed changes in herself. She stood taller, her voice carried more weight. She wasn't just the woman her kids had discarded. She was a leader, a force. But late at night, alone with her thoughts, she wondered, could she win the lawsuit and still lose her family? Was there a way to mend what was broken without surrendering her pride? The community's support grew. A fundraiser at the local church raised money for legal fees. Kids painted a mural on the home's exterior, a vibrant scene of hills and sunflowers. Margaret felt the weight of their trust. She couldn't let them down. But as the court date loomed, a new question surfaced. Was she ready to face her children, not as their mother, but as their adversary? The courtroom in the county courthouse was small, its wooden benches worn from years of disputes. Margaret sat beside Ed, her hands folded, her face a mask of calm. Across the room, Tom and Lisa sat with their lawyer, a slick man from Nashville who kept adjusting his tie. The air crackled with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, called the room to order. Tom's testimony came first. He spoke of Margaret's erratic behavior, claiming she'd always been stubborn, that buying the nursing home was a sign of delusion. Lisa followed, her voice shaky, saying they'd only wanted to protect her. Margaret listened, her heart twisting. Their words painted her as a frail, irrational old woman, a stranger, not their mother. When it was her turn, Margaret took the stand with quiet dignity. She didn't shout or cry. She told her story, raising her kids alone, sacrificing everything, only to be left at Willow Creek like a discarded relic. She spoke of the home's transformation, the lives she'd touched, the community she'd built. "I didn't buy this place for revenge," she said, her voice steady. "I bought it to prove I'm still here, still worth something." The residents' testimonies sealed it. Ruth, the librarian, described Margaret's garden, how it gave her purpose. A nurse spoke of better wages and happier patients. The judge's eyes softened as she listened. When the ruling came, it was swift. Margaret's ownership was upheld, the ban on her children's visits deemed legal. Tom and Lisa's faces fell, their lawyers stammering objections. Margaret won, but victory felt hollow. As she left the courthouse, she saw her kids in the parking lot. Tom looked angry, Lisa tearful. For a moment, she wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap. But she turned away, climbing into Ed's truck. She'd fought for her dignity, but the cost was a family fractured beyond repair, or so it seemed. Back at Willow Creek, the residents threw a party. Music filled the air, and laughter echoed through the halls. Margaret smiled, but her heart wasn't in it. She stepped outside, staring at the hills under the winter sky. What had she really won? A building? A cause? Or had she lost the one thing she'd always fought for? Her children? Winter settled over Willow Creek, blanketing the hills in frost. The nursing home was a beacon now, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. Margaret's story had spread beyond Tennessee, inspiring articles and even a TV segment. She was a local legend, the woman who'd turned betrayal into triumph. But the weight of her choices grew heavier. The 6-month ban was nearly over. Margaret wrestled with what came next. Should she let Tom and Lisa back in? Could she trust them? Ruth's words echoed. Kids make mistakes. But these weren't spilled milk or missed curfews. These were wounds that cut deep. Still, Margaret couldn't shake the image of their faces in the courtroom, shocked and small. One snowy evening, a letter arrived, hand-delivered by a neighbor. It was from Lisa, written in her neat script. Margaret hesitated, then opened it. Lisa poured out her regret, admitting she'd been selfish, caught up in her own life. She wrote of missing their old Sunday dinners, of wishing she'd listened more. Tom had added a note, gruff but sincere. "I was wrong, Mom. I'm sorry." Margaret's eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She folded the letter and tucked it away. The next day, she called a meeting with the residents. She shared the letter, her voice steady but soft. "I don't know if I can forgive them," she admitted, "but I want to try." The residents nodded, some sharing their own stories of fractured families. Ruth squeezed her hand. "You don't have to decide today," she said. "Just keep the door open." Margaret began to see her kids not as enemies, but as flawed, human. She'd built a new family at Willow Creek, but maybe there was room for her old one, too. She drafted a response, inviting Tom and Lisa to visit when the ban ended. No promises, just a chance to talk. She mailed it, her hands steady but her heart racing. What would they say? Would they show up? As the ban's end neared, Margaret focused on the home. She started a mentorship program, pairing residents with local teens to share skills like woodworking and storytelling. The community grew tighter, a living testament to her vision. But the question of her kids loomed, a quiet storm on the horizon. The ban ended on a cold February morning. Margaret stood in the nursing home's lobby, her hands clasped, watching the door. She'd told the staff to let Tom and Lisa in if they came. The clock ticked past noon, then 1. No one came. Margaret's heart sank, but she kept busy, helping a resident with a puzzle, checking the garden's winter crops. Maybe they wouldn't show. Maybe that was their answer. At 3, the door swung open. Tom and Lisa stepped inside, hesitant, their faces pale against the winter light. Margaret froze, her breath catching. They looked older, worn, as if the months had aged them, too. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Lisa stepped forward, her eyes wet. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered. Tom nodded, his voice rough. "We messed up. Bad." Margaret didn't rush to them. She let their words hang, heavy and real. "Why now?" she asked. Tom shifted, uncomfortable. "We didn't get it. What we did to you. Seeing you in court, it hit us." Lisa added, "We read about what you've done here. You're not just our mom. You're incredible." The conversation was halting, raw. Margaret listened as they spoke of their guilt, their lives unraveling under the weight of their choices. Tom's business was struggling. Lisa's engagement had fallen apart. They weren't asking for pity, they were asking for a chance. Margaret felt the old anger stir, but something else, too, a flicker of hope. She led them to the garden, showing them the rows of winter greens, the mural painted by the kids. Residents waved, some calling her name. Tom and Lisa saw her world, the one she'd built without them. "This is what I've been doing," she said. "This is who I am now." They nodded, quiet, taking it in. The talk stretched into evening. No one promised forgiveness, but they agreed to try. Margaret felt lighter, as if a stone had been lifted from her chest. Could they rebuild? She didn't know, but for the first time in months, she wanted to find out. Spring arrived, coaxing green from the hills. Willow Creek was a haven now, its halls filled with laughter, its garden bursting with life. Margaret had become more than an owner. She was a leader, a friend, a second mother to many. The residents thrived, and the community saw her as one of their own, a woman who'd turned pain into purpose. Tom and Lisa visited weekly now, slowly rebuilding trust. They brought small gifts, flowers, a knitted scarf, tokens of their effort. Margaret didn't let them off easy. She asked hard questions, demanded honesty. But she also listened, laughed, shared stories of her new life. They were learning who she was, not just as their mother, but as Margaret Hale, the woman who'd reclaimed her worth. One Sunday, they joined the residents for a barbecue in the garden. Tom helped grill, Lisa served lemonade, and Margaret watched, her heart full. It wasn't perfect. The scars of their betrayal remained, but they were healing, stitch by stitch. She'd shown them, and herself, that she was more than their choices, more than their abandonment. As the sun set, Ruth pulled Margaret aside. "You did good, kid," she said, her eyes twinkling. Margaret smiled, looking at the crowd, her kids, her residents, her community. "We did good," she corrected. She'd lost a piece of her family, but she'd gained a bigger one. And in that moment, she knew she hadn't just survived. She'd thrived. The journey hadn't been about revenge or even forgiveness. It was about reclaiming her own story. Margaret Hale, once discarded, had built a legacy of resilience, love, and second chances. And that was enough.